And we're live. Hey, everybody. You're joining us for the Inclusivity and Representation in Horror Gaming panel. My name is Cassie Clark. I am filling in for Ian and giving him a break because Ian has been a rock star all weekend, Ian and the Gehenna Gaming crew. So major shout out to all of them for putting this together and keeping it running. Okay, so we're going to start with some intros. And I'm just going to go down the chat here. So Natalie, why don't you go ahead and start?
I'm Natalie Pudim. I'm a professional game master for Charm Person Games out of Baltimore, Maryland. And I also run a local women and non-binary Dungeons and Dragons meetup called Critical Misses.
Nice.
Awesome. What about you, Jess?
I'm Jess Lanzillo. I am the creative director for Magic the Gathering. And I also am an organized play DM. So I just do basically every single possible setting that I can in organized play settings. So primarily conventions and whatnot. I've done a fair amount of homebrews and game mastering myself for personal groups, but I try to keep it to the conventions and to a more participatory audience.
Awesome. Joe.
Oh, my turn. Okay, hi. I'm Joe Fitz. I'm originally from Montgomery, Alabama, but now I live in Mobile, Alabama. I am a storyteller for my homebrew campaign of Montgomery by Night, VTM V5 edition, and I am a nerd.
You're in good company. All right, let me get the butchering of this pronunciation out of the way. Is it Ify or Ivy?
No, you had it right, Ify.
Oh, cool. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Awesome name, by the way.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm Ify Nwadiwe, aka sorry, I went in autopilot. Normally I go Ify Nwadiwe, aka If D's on my show Super Punch, but Ify Nwadiwe, actor, writer, comedian, professional nerd. Been done lots of live plays. Love love being nerdy, love getting into all the stuff, doing all the plays. But yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome.
Yes,
So I know that this is just such like a softball, easy conversation to have with everyone. So, so let's start off kind of talking about what inclusivity looks like for horror, what you think it should look like, and then we'll kind of dig into some of the holes that we've seen and would like to fill, and then we'll end off on a little bit stronger note with what we think we can do going forward and how we can really address that, and if we know of any tools or any projects that are doing really great with it. So let's just start it off. What should inclusivity in horror look like? I know I started with a really easy question.
Yeah.
I'll start off. I feel like I'm curious which way this panel's going to lean. In one hand, as someone who primarily game masters and writes my own adventures and campaign settings, trying to make campaign worlds and adventures that kind of reflect the actual world how it is and that people can see themselves in, but also in creating tables that kind of foster that welcoming feeling that that are actively bringing people to the table who might not normally feel welcome in this sort of hobby.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's just, I think the base is making it welcome so that, people will feel comfortable. And I think it kind of even goes back to a conversation me and Natalie were having on just the comedy, which is just setting those boundaries, having that open discussion and make in ways so that because I think just in general, humans just don't like conflict. So instead of, approaching any problems or friction, they'll just remove themselves and a lot of people will then not wonder why, won't check up and be like, oh, nothing probably happened, nothing this. Whereas with me, I've kind of been more proactive. If anyone removed themselves from any, like just on a kind of micro sense, if I in my Discord, if someone leaves, and someone has made a little bit of a to-do about it, I definitely check in to make sure that there was anything I would do. And sometimes it's like, oh no, there's just I'm in too many Discords, and that's fine. But I think it's just that and something I'm probably going to repeat a lot, is just actively trying to stay conscious about those things, because I think a lot of the things we're going to talk about are things that can kind of just go by if you don't pay attention, because everyone, has their microaggressions that they deal with and things they specifically deal with. And something that I like to champion is like, Black issues for me is always going to be a standout, is always going to be on my mind. So I make sure that I'm focusing on women's issues, gay rights, trans rights, everything across it, because I don't need to, like, I'm already gonna have that, for lack of a better word, like dog whistle of like, if something racist towards Black people happen, it's gonna pop out to me. So I have to do the work to make sure I'm looking out for others. And I think that's what everyone should be doing, is making sure you're looking out for others and looking out for things that you might not flag but might be flagged for others.
Yeah, something I really like to keep in mind is that, it's a holistic situation, from generating new games, generating new settings, generating adventures. A big vector of my activism is disability activism, right? And so there's so many archetypes that get played up in, genre settings that are, the like super crip, or something like, if they're blind, then they're super, like an amazing seer of the future, in a magical setting. So trying to, get away from those archetypes and stereotypes within the generation of the game materials themselves, visually showing representation in your game materials. Pay artists to make art of a bunch of different looking people, and have them in there, just so that people can see it reflected for themselves. And then, finally, when you're at a table, again, I was saying earlier, I tend to stick more to organized play environments, because I want to bring people to the table that maybe were intimidated by home play groups, or felt like it was for some other group that wasn't them. So I try to do things in these environments that are a little more, bringing a bunch of different people together, setting those ground rules right away, and saying, hey, let's, we didn't do it here, which I noted, introduce ourselves with our pronouns, make sure that everyone has an X card on the table, so that they don't even have to say anything if they're not comfortable with the situation. Giving everyone that out, and then listening, because there's a lot of vectors of oppression and exclusivity that we will miss because we aren't a member of that group, right? So someone will say, hey, this was actually a microaggression that happened. You may not know, right? And just being like, oh my goodness, okay, well, let's deal with that the best we can. And in a horror environment, I think it's extra important, because so much of it is suspense, and you're really taking people's emotions and hearts into your hands. So doing a lot of checking in as you're going along to make sure, hey, this is something you're voluntarily participating in, right? We're not just leading you down a really dark passageway that you don't want to deal with. Maybe you are working through some vectors of your oppression, right? Like, and you want to deal with that really, really upfront. You need to explicitly say that. Everyone needs to explicitly participate in that. You can't be going in with blinders on that.
Yeah, that goes back to, we had a consent panel earlier today, and a lot of the same, just talk about it up front, came up. How do you guys approach that at your table or in your games if you're a player? How does that go? And we start off with Joe. We haven't heard from you
Yes.
yet.
Yes. It's fine. I'm just taking in all the energy I'm getting. Well, basically, normally what I do is when I'm running my game, I usually have like a moment where, like, before we start, let's have a dialogue. Let's talk about what's good, what's not good, what could you deal with, but then kind of like, let's figure this thing out. Um, and then we usually go from there. And then after the game, we have like a mediation period, and we talk about, hey, all right, I'm here, storyteller, tell me what's going on. How do you feel? Well, I feel like this. I feel like that. I was like, okay, what can we do to mend this? Do you not need to do this anymore, or what do you want to do? And if you want to leave, feel free to tell me. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. No strings. It's all right. Do what you can. And if we can't solve it, we'll work it out. We will fix it. We will try our best. The key thing, I think, is listening. Listening. When someone says, okay, I'm uncomfortable, stop immediately. Do not press the issue any further. Try to get the words, the feelings together, and find out what you can do to fix this.
Yeah, aftercare. Chad is saying aftercare is important. It's always important.
Yes, it is very important. Yay, thank you.
What about the rest of you guys?
There's so many spectrums where we're all in.
Yeah, no,
For sure.
I think it is that, just to go back to boundaries, is just that, yeah, that pre chat. I think we were talking about, like, before the games, kind of going over as the game master, storyteller, what you have planned, without, like, necessarily giving all of it away, but just necessarily just kind of letting people know the themes that you plan to explore, and making sure everyone's okay with that. Because if you can, like, have that conversation early on, and not have to, deal with it in the moment, that's always better. But then also, I think the aftercare is important, because, with boundaries, you have to keep checking in. Boundaries aren't something that you set and forget and never, explore again. You keep checking in, because, maybe one day someone was up for it, and then that day they just happened to not be up for it. And you want to be mindful of that.
Another thing I do in stuff I write, I run my Critical Misses, my women and non-binary group, in a campaign setting I built on my own, and I have new players coming in every week. It's hard for me all of the time to get, like, a sense of the table. So I built a campaign world that just, I wish D&D would take it out of their manuals, but just gets rid of the fantasy racism. Elves and dwarves, they don't hate each other in this world. This is a world where just, people might have disagreements, but I don't want to tell stories of fantasy racism. I don't want to tell stories of racism, and I especially don't want to do it at a table where I'm having new people come in every week and I'm not sure what they're bringing. So it's a world that doesn't have sexism in it. It doesn't have homophobia. It doesn't have racism. And, I think some people might say, like, that's not realistic, but dragons aren't realistic.
Dragons are not real.
Throwing fireballs at people are not realistic.
I hate telling people that, because they need to hear that. It's
Right.
not real.
Yeah.
Right. So I think you can bake some of that feeling into your settings, like, especially for one-shots or things where you're not fully comfortable with all the players at your table.
Yeah, and I think that's very important, and also to, like, revisit that, like, it's not real. It's also like, look, if you're not in the game, don't worry about, what other folks are doing. And also, like, I think that's very important. Is like, yeah, if you're trying to make it the most, welcoming game for new people coming in, I think removing that is a great thing. Because the one big problem that I could just see right away is if someone's new to the world in general and is dealing with fantasy racism out of nowhere, and they're just trying out D&D. They're like, yo, why is this person being a dick to me out of nowhere? And and was like, I didn't sign up for this. I wanted a fantasy world where racism didn't exist. It's called fantasy, not real to see. So
Put that on a shirt.
Yeah.
Put that on a shirt.
Well, and what I find really, like, it's, I have a very similar homebrew setting that I run at a women in non-binary gaming a thing that we have here in Seattle. So that's awesome. I think that a bunch of us are moving in that direction. You can do that with fantasy, but a lot of horror settings are real world based, right? There's a reason I work on magic, because I'm like, I'm going to go and deal with the fantasy stuff. And, like, that's going to be a little bit easier for me. Parking stuff, especially World of Darkness stuff, in the real world, and, it being dark, grim, dark kind of stuff. Like, how do you work with, things that are, real vectors of oppression, IRL, right?
Yeah, for the way I do, I think it's just that convo. Because I think having that real oppression can also be an empowering experience, because if you have that conversation and you get to allow that player to overcome that in that situation, or maybe deal with it in a way they haven't been able to in the past, that is cathartic in its own way. But you can only get that through that conversation. Like, there's the reason the Mafia 3, when you got to be the black guy in the South, like that, there were so many black people who were like, yeah, we want that, for that main reason. And that, once again, it goes back to the fantasy. Is like, there are so many systematic reasons that people who deal with oppression can't be upfront. Like, you know, it's not that they as a person aren't a confrontational person. It's just that we still have bills to pay, we still have relationships we need to keep, we still have to tiptoe to make sure we still have somewhere to go at the end of the day. So even though we normally, if it was just two strangers on the street, I would tell you about yourself. If I'm in a situation where I have to, you know, play nice, play, you know, coy, and allow you to get away with it, then of course if I'm playing with my boys, with my friends, I don't only play with men. I just
No one
minds.
Yeah.
This is the gender inclusive version of boys.
Yeah.
It's perfectly fine. I get all of that though. I get that.
But like, you know, of course we're gonna do a situation where it's like, okay, I know your boss was on some whack stuff today, so don't worry, I'm gonna let you take that out on this orc, you know, or like, I mean, it's that's the fun about what we're doing. We're playing, and so we're also getting to decompress, and like once again, conversations.
Big conversations. Talking is so important.
Mm-hmm.
You hit a lot of nails on the head with that one. Oh.
I guess that is a good kind of segue now. So, on top of communicating, how best do we steer our games towards these more inclusive areas, and not just opening the door and being like, whoever wants to sit in, come sit in, it's fine, you're welcome and you're safe here, even as I run your characters through terrible and horrifying things. So what do you guys do at your tables? Is there anything in particular? Is there anything that you've seen that you're like, yes, everybody needs to be doing this at their table?
Ooh. That's a hard one.
You know, usually when I do the X card, you know, I present the X card for the first time, which is, you know, a card you say you just put it on the table when you're not feeling a particular situation. I normally will just make myself the subject of someone who is experiencing something bad so that people can see what that could entail, and do it from like a highly escalated situation to a what could seem like a low escalation situation, but using a trigger word or something that would make me uncomfortable. You know, a lot of times I'll even use spiders. I'm like, okay, well, someone actually has a phobia of spiders. That's very real for them. You may laugh at it at the table, but that is a real thing. And we're just going to go ahead and flip that card. And that's just how that's going to go. Spider is now pig. We're going to go stab this pig, I guess. Great. Sounds good.
That's actually a really cool idea.
Yeah.
One thing I think to make tables feel like that is I'm being a woman, and particularly a trans woman, I have a lot of times been the only woman in a party and playing the only woman character. And then all the NPCs we meet are also men. And it just sometimes seems like, oh, am I playing the only woman in this world? And it's become a joke at my table that I lean hard toward making NPCs women. I feel like I'm making up for, the balance that you see on TV shows a little bit. It's probably closer to 50-50, but I think for everyone it feels like hard leaning toward women just because I try and make so many more NPCs. And another place where I try and include characters is like making characters that look like normal people and aren't jokes, like making fat characters. It was actually something Magic did a year or two ago, had a fat character as like this badass necromancer on a card. And like it meant like so much to me. I was like, oh, this is something that I want to see that I'm not putting in my own worlds I'm building. And it like really pushed me to do that. And I think so much we see like lithe, sexy vampires in our horror game, and then like, there's no reason your sexy vampire has to be skinny.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point in that world building aspect. It's something that I like. There's a rule that like I started using for sketch, then it like went into just when I wrote script, and now it's kind of inkling into whenever I also build worlds for role play, which is just straight up making it half men and women. There's no
That's what I've
reason for it
done.
to be one way, because and all it took was one sketch teacher being like, yo, have you noticed that every sketch is just all men for no reason? Like, why is this like desk jockey over here? Like this character literally doesn't matter, it can be anyone. And it's just because of the conditioning of everything we watch. All media is just everything. So you can buck against that by then going into a situation where it's just 50-50, and then sometimes you'll have a moment where you're like, oh no, it has to be all men, and then congratulations, guess what, you earned it, because you really hit a point where you're like, oh, this has to be all men, or this has to be all women, because you had to think about it, because we so mindlessly just make the default straight white male, just because that's all we watched on television, straight white male. So our brain is just filling in those blanks, and that's often what happens in fantasy. If you don't actively describe a character, 9 times out of 10 someone's going to envision a straight white male
Straight white
as that
man.
character.
That is the truest thing ever. Obviously I work with artists all the time, and you know, people are getting better, but if you aren't very specifically saying, you know, race, gender presentation, all of these things, you're going to get back, you know, the archetype that you would expect for whatever it is that you're giving. You know, if it's an elf, it's going to be like a pale, lithe, you know, leaping from the branches elf, usually like a more feminine man. You don't get a lot of variance unless you're extremely prescriptive with it. When I DM, I make metrics for myself, right? Like I measure what I'm doing. I say, hey, I've got all these NPCs here. I want to show the diversity of the world. Let me put my money where my mouth is and make sure that NPC list is stacked with a bunch of different kinds of people. Um, Sometimes you have to make up people on the fly. And I've caught myself doing that where it's like, oh, it's just like a generic guard, city guard dude, looks like a guard, and then everyone paints exactly the same picture in their head. So really monitoring yourself and checking yourself on that too. It can be challenging. So keeping that nice tight list of just like, here's like 20 NPC, just kind of physical definitions. And then usually people will take those and start to flesh out the character for you, right?
Yeah.
That helps a lot. And it gives people a sense of the world being more lived in and, accessible anyway.
You're not the first person to have like a list of NPCs that you literally just like, this is what you look like. Because in my game,
sorry.
one of my characters, no problem. One of my characters, because I play vampire, she's a baron. It's an anarch city. My players loathe the hell out of this white woman, Myra Delilah. They hate her. Brown hair, white lady. She's a slave owner's daughter.
Ooh.
And she's very controversial, but she doesn't say. She's one of those white people that's like, I'm not racist. Some of my friends are, and you're like,
Right.
Yeah, and I chose that character out off random, out of a whim. I was like, need an antagonist, need someone that is not what you expect. And they were like, oh, but she's this anarch person who's like all about free will and everything else, but then she's curt and she wears a pantsuit, which one of my players absolutely hates. He's like, I want her pantsuit, and the pantsuit has to die. And I was like, everybody likes pantsuits, but that was my little take on NPCs. So you're not alone there. I have a whole notebook.
I think to that point, like not being afraid when you're creating characters of tokenism, because that's how you get characters is, they start off token and then they just become part of the world and they're not the token anymore. They're just part of the world.
They're part of the world.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. Tokenism and words like the diversity for the sake of because tokenism, there is like some at least like genuine like idea behind it, because you do have people who just sit there, and I have a story that I tell more the further we get away from it, the more I can talk about it, but like I have a friend who's writing for a very popular television show, and on that show they had a black character who went to be token, and he was in the room, and he told me one day, he was like, oh, I kind of figured out why this character is a token, and it was because he was like, it was because like when they try and pitch story ideas for this character, since he's the only black character, they don't want to present him with flaws, because then, you know, they're afraid of being racist, of adding flaws to this only black character. Which I think the biggest moral of that story is you can prevent tokenism by adding weight and nice flavor to
Oh
these
yes.
characters. If you can add flavor and weight to it, it'll be earned. That character, I promise you, will not be a token. I promise you that.
I think there's so many players though who are, or and people who run games who are just so afraid of not being able to put that weight in that they just don't put people in, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like you got to put them in first,
Yeah.
and then you can add the weight
Yeah,
to
don't
it.
worry. Yeah, exactly.
Just treat them like people. What?
What a concept.
People with concepts, with flaws, with ideas, with personality traits, all that good stuff. Again, I go back to my Baron lady. They do not like her. I gotta find a picture of her so show you. I could find it. He has a smirk on her face.
All right, well, he's digging that up. We've already kind of talked a little bit of how we can fill these holes, how we can get these gaps to be less noticeable and maybe eventually go away entirely would be really great. So we're building up characters. We're addressing issues at the table as appropriate as we can without completely alienating people. Though sometimes like you could just get out of here and it's fine. So what other ways do you think that on like a main level, on the mainstream level, can we increase inclusivity and representation so it's not all just the standard hero is some white dude?
Ooh,
Companies can hire non-white dudes.
Yeah.
with
They could just
merit.
start doing that. That
With
would be
merit.
That'd be
great.
great.
Yeah.
Right.
With-
Yeah.
Hire people who are non-white dudes with merit, who have the skill, to have the skills to do it, and not just be like, all right, we need a black person. Steve, you.
Yep.
No, actually go through this person with all the about their skills, their qualifications, what they do. Actually talk to people. Do not tokenize people just because you need to have a pretty picture to put on the internet. That's my
Right.
biggest thing.
Yep.
Please don't do that.
And
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you're at home and not streaming or that, like invite your people of color and your queer friends and your women friends to your table, like that aren't playing. And if you don't have friends that are like that, take a good look at the friends you have and maybe expand your group of friends.
Yes, look around like, all these are white people. Yep. Problem. Fix it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I know it's always it's so interesting because every time there's that combo where it's like, oh, so we're supposed to just seek out friends because they're black or gay or trans, and it's like, well, yeah, you often seek out friends because they have nice positions that you'd like to have. So what's the difference in diversifying it? Like I think, you know, like we'd like to imagine that we're still in middle school and we're just making friends with the people who sit next to us, but we definitely have, I think, subtle motives behind who we make friends with. Lots of times it is just innocent stuff like, oh, that person's cool, we're into the same stuff. But I think, you know, you can make an active concerted effort to do that. I think to answer the question asked is, yeah, it's the same thing. It's going to be, you know, high profile platforms making sure they have a diverse set of people, because if you're the way I look at it, you know, full disclosure, so I'm on an all black improv team at Upright Citizens Brigade Theater called White Women. We we started
Wait a
we
minute.
start
Say that again?
yeah, we're called White Women.
I could not have heard that. White women?
White women. We're
Okay.
six
I didn't
black
mean to
men.
interrupt.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And when they say come into the stage, white women, 6 black men walk out.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, but like the reason we started that was when we were going to UCB at the time, I think I remember when I wrote my diversity scholarship to UCB, I was like, I'm looking on the talent page and the only people of color were Donald Glover and Aziz Ansari, and we need to do more. And we were all like the running joke we did where we were all the Black dude on all the improv teams, and we made a Voltron mega group. And I say all this to say that when we started, there weren't that many people of color in the community, and there were so many people who was like, oh, I never thought of going to taking classes at UCB until I saw y'all, because I knew there's a space with me. And I think that's something that's universal. I think, people are so often in their heads like, oh, that's a white thing, or that's not for
Oh
me.
God.
And I
Yeah.
think when you see people of color, LGBTQI folks playing tabletop games, you're like, oh, there is a space for me. Especially like if we're keeping it all the way 100% real,
Please.
nerd spaces tend to, like, people just assume they're toxic white male spaces. Like that's the general assumption over nerd spaces. So there are people who might have light nerd interests that don't even step near it because of that idea. Everyone thinks of the kid on Xbox Live when they think of nerdy.
Right.
Racist third grader.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. It's
So
always dropping the N bomb every time.
yeah,
You're like,
they're
you
still
need to
playing
be in
Call of Duty
bed.
too. Yeah. So the more we can show them that we're out here and there's a space for you, the more people will show up. The more people, and the more we encourage them to stream and all that. I think one of my biggest things I like to pat myself on the back for is just how my community for both my podcast Nerdificent and my stream is a mix of people who identify as many different things and many different races and many genders, because there's so many friends. I ain't gonna name them, I'm not trying to drag you, I'm just making a point here that you go into their discords and it's like just mostly dudes, mostly dudes, mostly dudes, mostly dudes. And I didn't want to be that way because I'm for everyone. And I think that's also because all right, we just gonna just keep talking. Sorry, I'm talking too much. I'm gonna take it in for a landing. But I think also prominent people in
That's
the nerd
good.
space needs to be vocal about issues. Like I'm always gonna say turfs can kiss my ass. Like you want, because everyone wants to play it safe and make everyone feel welcome. But I'm gonna keep it funky with you. You're not welcome if you don't respect Black people, if you don't respect people of color, if you don't respect gay people, if you don't respect trans people. You're not welcome. Don't come hang with me. Don't come. I don't care how much of my merch you bought. Don't come kick it. You're not allowed here. This is a space for everyone to be all right. And I'll give you the boot just as quick. And it's building that culture. And that's one thing I found just being on all these different like nerdy channels is the as active and vocal as you are, your community will feel that vocal and your community will build itself around that idea. Now that doesn't mean I don't think people can grow. People are very open to being like, hey, I'll give you this corrected action, or hey, these are actually my pronouns, or hey, we don't say that around here. And you can correct and still kick it. But what that does mean is if you coming in with that energy and you like, nah, y'all wrong, it's like, nah, y'all, you gone.
Yeah, I mean,
100.
it's the best thing is, streaming, right? Like I get to see faces that I've been playing games in shops for that many years. Like, I was the only, woman, let alone like non-cis white guy playing Magic in Indiana, where I grew up, which was, like for the majority of, the time that I lived there. And, most of the game shops that I went to play D&D, like I would be an outlier. But then other people would see me and be like, okay, well, she's here, she's kicking it. She's like got these dudes straightened out on some of their bullshit. Maybe I
Mm-hmm.
could come in too, right? But not everyone wants to be a pioneer, right? Like it takes a lot of energy. So you
Lots of
have to
energy.
focus that, right? Like you have to say, hey, what is my energy going to go to today? Am I going to like simulate the disruption of my oppression within the game that I'm playing with my friends at home where I feel safe? Am I going to go in and try to now use some of those learnings and that role playing that I've done, that I've kind of worked out with my buddies, and take it into a wider atmosphere, and take it into the game shop and kind of start bringing other people in there? Or am I going to just, I'm going to go on a stream with my friends and just put ourselves out there and say, hey, gaming looks like super inclusive and accessible for everyone. It's awesome. It's the best thing that's ever happened to, tabletop role playing. I couldn't be happier about it. I get to see people that I had told myself a narrative for a very long time, like, oh, I'm just like the only woman out here that does any of this stuff. Da, 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 da. Not true at all. Totally bullshit. It was just in my particular area. But a lot of people were scared and we didn't know how to connect. So, now we can do that. It's super rad. Thank goodness for like inclusive discords like yours. Like that's super rad.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I was reading chat. So
What's
let's
chat?
spend the Twitch chat. So let's spend the last few minutes here talking about projects that we think are doing a really great job of this and like signal boost, that kind of thing. And if we have a little bit of extra time left over, we'll get some questions from chat.
One
Okay.
thing I've been really interested in lately are game systems that have queerness baked into them. One creator who's doing a great job with that is Avery Alder, who writes Monster Hearts and Dream Askew. Another is Lucian Kahn, who's writing Visigoths versus Molgoths, which is a fantastic game.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, I recommend checking both of those creators out. They're doing fantastic stuff.
I'm going to be vampy. I'm going to say B-Dave Walters for Long Beach by Night. He's been doing really good. I think one of the B-Dave, if you're watching, I apologize. I think one of the characters is non-binary, and they use they them pronouns, and B-Dave uses they them when he's addressing that person. I was like, oh wow, that's cool, because I don't usually see that. I usually don't. So I was like, that was a thing. I'm also, of course, LA by Night, because you don't watch it. But Annabelle, Erika Ishii playing Annabelle, and her character, because I think Annabelle's character is like, I think she's bisexual. Because it's very hard to read her in that aspect. Not like you have to, but she's just, because like she has a girlfriend, she has a boyfriend, but then, oop, I'm about to spoil stories. So there's that. Watch Vampire Channel. They're awesome. I'm going to shut up now.
Chad is saying bisexual and poly.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. She's awesome.
Yeah,
At
chat pulling
times.
up. I guess I guess I'll follow me.
You're the next black man. Go for it.
Yeah. All right. Not necessarily horror, but I do want to shout out my friends at College Humor doing Dimension 20. My friend Allie, they're playing.
Love College Humor.
Yeah, they're playing non-binary character, and that was one that I really like. Brendan is a great DM and is allowing them to just kind of be themselves and not. I feel like it is interesting because I do feel like there's a new wave to tabletop where we're allowing people to represent themselves in it and be themselves in it, and very diverse cast, and Ali, I'll always stand them. They're one of my great friends from the UCB era, and I love everything I see them in. And shout out, I think, to them. That's I just want to shout them out right now.
Good shout.
I'm a big LARPer. I've been a big fan of Entropic Endeavors and everything that they've been doing. So check them out. Velvet Noir was super cool, super like, hey, how am I going to deal with this situation that's like set in the real world, set in like a film noir way, but it was like super queer, super like non-binary inclusive, like just super trans inclusive. It was awesome. So everything that they're working on is cool, and it's like definitely like fresh new voices in LARP, which I've been super appreciating.
Awesome. We don't really hear that much about, I don't actually hear that much about LARP because that's not really my community. So I'm always really interested to hear what others are doing, especially right now, considering we're not allowed outside.
Yeah, my LARP was canceled. I'm part of a LARP too, so like when you said that, it hits right at home.
I know.
Mind's Eye Theater Vampire, and I am my character Dominique, the DJ who cannot DJ right now because the DJ club is closed. So yeah, so like we're all on Discord now because of it. But I get it. But I appreciate that when my storyteller, he was like, "Is your character gay?" I was like, "Very." And he is Creole sounding. So like when I speak, he was like, "Wait, is he Cajun?" I was like, "Well, yes, sir. You really think he is that Cajun there, not chef?" And they were like, "Holy shit, Joe! I can't believe that Cajun and gay and black and a DJ. What is going on?" I'm like, "It's
a party. That's what.
a whole party." And he hosts bomb parties, like the phone parties at his club too. So like phone parties, blood, music. You know, when you walk in, you hear like SpongeBob jellyfish song. You know that. Like when you walk, he's
Perfect. That's great. All right. Was there any other last points you guys wanted to go over before we toss it over to chat? And chat, get those questions rolling if you
I
have
have a
any.
picture of the lady I was telling you about.
Hell
Yes.
I found
yes.
her. Let me see if I can post her.
Oh my gosh. That
Doesn't
is
she look
better than I even imagined.
that smirk, everything?
Totally.
Perfect.
That's so good.
We
So
got questions.
we had a question earlier about playing a character who isn't your same gender. So I believe the question was for men playing female characters, but we can open that up to just you playing basically whatever character you want. Do you think that there are restrictions on that? Or is it a free for all because it is a fantasy, as long as you're doing it mindfully and respectfully?
Ooh.
I mean, I've never put the restriction on it, right? Like,
Yeah.
first of all, like, you know, as role playing is like the potential for like exploring a lot about your own personality, exploring you know, how to get over certain vectors of your own oppression. Like, people are going to explore their gender in role play all the time. Like, that is a thing that's going to happen. Are there bad actors in that? Yeah. But like you boot them from the table, right? And it's usually some dude who's just like, I have boobs and I'm just touching my boobs all the time.
Oh,
I'm also having
God.
lots of sex. And you're like, okay, like that's cool. And also my boobs are really soft and I'm just like mysteriously like enamored of them. And you're like,
What
that's
is
not how
guys'
a woman would
obsession
ever.
with boobs?
Right?
Like,
You know,
why?
Are there going to be bad actors? Yeah. Do you want to be like, you know, usually give them, hey, that's kind of weird. It's kind of creeping everyone out. Let them know that first and then be like, okay, now this isn't like your weird like rape fantasy thing or whatever it is that you want to do. Like this got to go. You got to do a different character. That's usually where I sit on it.
Yeah, I feel like it. I think it comes down to it because you know, at most like closed tables anyway. Like if no, you know, you're just kind of playing, and as long as you think it is being mindful, not disrespectful, and just kind of that's just the
100%.
character you want to be. You know, you just want to play a badass black woman, then fine. If you just make sure you're doing that and not doing it in lieu of just finding a friend of color to invite to the table. Like, don't do it because you're like, oh, we need to diversify this. Do it because like it's something you actually want to do and you want to do it. And I honestly, I think you should lean into it and maybe like do some research and find out learn yourself on some things with it. Like for example, in the Dark Ages vampire game that we played last night, it was supposed to be in the Dark Ages, but I specifically wanted to play a character that came from the West African empires to show that black people didn't just pop up as slaves in the
You did awesome, by the way.
Yeah.
You did really awesome, by the way. I
Thank you so
watched it.
much.
I was very, yeah, that was
You know,
good.
because it's just one of those things. That's why, of course, I'm gonna shout out once again Medieval POC. They're kind of doing the work right now on Twitter and Tumblr,
Yeah.
where they're showing you all these different paintings of POC in medieval times to show that they were there, they were active, they were nobles, and they just didn't pop out of thin air. And you can't use it's taking place in Europe as an excuse not to have any POC in it, because actually POC was very active in those European times. It just
Especially the
was
Roman
because they were,
Empire.
yeah. It is just whitewash history, which we honestly can't blame you for. You got taught in the books you got taught from, but now in 2020, as an adult, you have no excuse when we have all the information in the world
Have a
right before
phone.
us. Yeah. So and I think I'm going to plus one that and say that's another way that, make sure if you're doing these, medieval or type of characters, you kind of like back the diversity with some facts, and that way you can kind of teach some things. If someone went to look up the Mali Empire or the Ghanan Empire from that, then that's a big win for me. So yeah.
And just to hop off that, history was a lot gayer than you think it was.
Oh
too.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yes!
Oh yeah.
Yes!
There's this like hotel in Portland that used to be a bathhouse that they keep not they pretend that it didn't used to be and everyone's like, no, we all know. Why are you like trying to erase that history? They're like, no, it was it wasn't. No. What?
Everybody knows. That was actually a good answer there. Well, it was a good answer anyway, but it covered another question that we got in chat about how to handle a character respectfully. So I think that was a
Oh yeah, most def.
good ender there.
My main note is like, if you're a person who tends to do voices at the table, just watch your voice, please. Like, don't start doing something weird that's going to make everyone really uncomfortable. Like,
yeah.
male, trying to play a female character. It's like, I'm just like, you're like, okay, no, come on, please stop. Unless you explain like, hey, this is Tinkerbell or whatever.
I do voices, and I usually, for the lady I just showed you guys, I have to, because I live in the South, and I have to find that balance because she's older, because she's more antebellum South. Like,
sure.
So I have to like funnel my voice into doing it, and it's like Gone with the Wind type of Southern accent that she does, and she's very serious about it. When she leans into certain words, she's really being serious. So I get it. She doesn't do the boob touching thing though. Everyone calls her a bitch, but I was like, she's assertive, because women are told when they're like being bossy or badass, you're being a bitch, but guys are like, oh, you're being the man. But I'm like, she's using her power to do what she needs to do, but she's not being like, I don't want to say that word, but that word, the C word, of being cunty about it. There it is. I just said it. But like that's why I love her.
All right. I think that's all the time that we have before we eat too much of the time on the final panel for this weekend. So why don't you guys go ahead and we'll say where we can find you, Natalie.
You can follow my company on Twitter at CharmPersonGame or on Facebook at CharmPersonGames. And also, if you're looking to add a little diversity to your streaming show, I'm at Natalie_20 on Twitter and would love to hear from you.
Awesome. What about you, Jess?
You can't find me. You can find magic everywhere, but I try to stay pretty inaccessible. You can find me at conventions, DMing games. You feel free to always come up and approach me. But yeah, otherwise I would be leaving myself open to a whole world of.
Yeah, I was saying, as a magic player, I get it.
Fair enough.
I'm not a big channel enough to get any of that stuff.
the magic community, baby. Oh my gosh.
All right, where are you at, Joe?
I am at Nola Fanger. I tried to, but it's like backwards on here, but NOLA_Fanger, FANGER on Twitter. That's my character, as well as my Twitter for games and whatnot. Everything that's not holy goes on that page. So if you want to hit me up, send me cool tweets, slide in my DMs, whatever, hey, hit me up. Send me some gay vamps, sex stuff, or whatever it is.
RIP your inbox.
Now I wish I had a Twitter too. I'd be like, also send me gay vampire stuff.
You're gonna have to make an account just whatever.
For that. Hit me up. I'm a fun person.
All right, Ify, where can we find you?
You can find me at Ify Nwadiwe on Twitter and Instagram, IFYNWADIWE. IfD's on Twitch. Starting this Thursday, I'll be running a mothership game with my friend Jeff Trammell, who made Craig of the Creek, Cody Ziegler, Fiona Nova from Rooster Teeth, and Eliza Pearl. And we're it's going to be a nice, spooky sci-fi horror ting. Everyone laughs because I truly do hate scary stuff stuff, but I'm always doing scary stuff. I don't know.
Me too.
Yeah.
Oh boy, oh, boy,
Hate
am I
it.
the jumpiest boy?
Well, it sounds fun.
Yeah. So check that out.
All right. Thank you guys so much. This was a great panel. And thanks again to Gehenna Gaming for putting all of this together.
Yeah, shout
This has
out to
been really
Gehenna
fun.
Gaming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Woo!
And thank you for moderating this. This was
Yeah,
Hey,
I know you were
anytime.
phenomenal. Thank you so much, Cassie.
No,
thank you for letting me
guys.
run my mouth.
Anytime.